My name is Christina Deemer. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a UX developer at Ally. So my work focuses on the front end, on structure, layout, styling, and user interaction. And I work mostly in React, and I have a special interest in accessibility. I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to attend the panel discussion by the Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup. That meetup was one of the highlights of my time in quarantine at home since the pandemic began. And I'm really grateful to the speakers, to Fen and Kedra and Santina, for being so vulnerable and authentic in discussing their experiences as technologists and as people who live with invisible disabilities. These days, like a lot of real life meetups have gone virtual, and a silver lining to that is that we can attend meetups that we otherwise wouldn't have because, you know, I'm not going to go to Chicago, I'm in the Philadelphia area. And a colleague of mine who is an accessibility specialist pointed out this talk by the Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup that seemed really cool, had a really great lineup of speakers. And I had seen one of the panelists speak, Fen Slatterly, at Liberty JS last fall, and their talk was one of the highlights of the conference for me. And the other two panelists were Kedra Cheney and Santina Kronisser. They all three work in tech. Fen and Santina are engineers, and Kedra is a digital strategist, and the panel discussion was on invisible disabilities, and all three have invisible disabilities. Invisible disabilities are physical, mental, or neurological impairments that are not visible from the outside, but can limit a person's mobility, senses, or activities. Invisible disabilities can lead to a lot of misunderstandings, false perceptions, and judgments. Examples of invisible disabilities include mental illnesses such as bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, chronic health conditions like lupus and MS, and neurological conditions like ADHD and autism. It can also include hearing and vision impairments. And what I learned is that all disabilities are invisible on the web. You don't know if the person who uses a screen reader has been totally blind since birth or is losing their sight to a degenerative condition and is just losing their sight and is learning to use a screen reader at age 35. Every panelist actually mentioned that they regularly use screen readers or voiceover technology, though none of them are blind. They use it because it helps them focus on large bits of text, because listening to content can be less taxing during times when they're experiencing a lot of pain or sensory stimulation. You just don't know who the end user is. You don't know if the person who wants to navigate your site with a keyboard has a severe permanent mobility issue, or if they have dyspraxia and find keyboard navigation to be more reliable than using a mouse. The web can be a very physically uncomfortable and emotionally unwelcoming place for people with disabilities. Autoplay videos, ads that flash, confusing forms, crowded sidebars, pages without hierarchical headings, sites that can't be navigated with a keyboard, not knowing what's going to happen when you click on a link, if it means it's going to take you to another page, or if you're going to have to download a PDF. For some people, like, having really annoying flashes on a web page are just annoying or a nuisance. But for people with invisible disabilities like autism, ADHD, or epilepsy, those, you know, flashing ads or flashing animations can be disorienting or distracting at best, and at worst they can cause meltdowns, seizures, migraines, or other painful issues. So while the web can help bring people together, and can provide access to people, to things that might not otherwise, like people might not otherwise have access to, like there can be many barriers for a lot of people. Is that a lot of times when we talk about screen reader users, we assume that the opposite of a screen reader user is a sighted user. But there are many users who are sighted who also use screen readers or voiceover technology. Just because the visuals can be overwhelming or taxing to read, or like people with, if there is a certain font that's used that's hard for somebody with dyslexia to read, it just might be more comfortable for them to use voiceover or screen reader. You won't ever know who your end user will be, and someone's comfort level may change depending on context. So while you may feel very comfortable with your particular laptop in your home office space, and you're comfortable navigating through a complex form to, let's say you're going to buy a pair of jeans, so you're comfortable figuring out the right size that you need, getting it into your shopping cart and adding your payment information. Your comfort level with that may change if you're trying to execute the same task in a crowded subway on your phone, and maybe you don't have a really great connection. And it's like that for everybody. We sort of go through various modalities throughout our day, throughout our life. What made you feel comfortable, what you were comfortable with today may not be your situation tomorrow. A few years ago, I broke my elbow and was in a cast for a little while that went from my wrist to my shoulder. And I was navigating my keyboard with one hand. So things that were comfortable the day before I broke my arm were not as comfortable the very next day. That was a temporary situation for me, but it's just an example of how our situations change over time, and even just throughout the day. So how do we address that in design and or content, or when we're building? And that is to prioritize the needs of the people who are most vulnerable, or the people that are going to have the most difficult time. Because when you build for those folks, you're going to make a higher quality experience for everybody, so that whenever this is why, captions on videos, like the people who use captions on videos are not only people who are permanently 100% deaf or have 100% hearing loss. All sorts of different people use captions. And it's the same sort of thing, a little tooltip that tells you how exactly to enter your username or your phone number in a form. That tooltip, or that little bit of note of direction, not only helps people who have neurological or cognitive differences that may make that hard to understand. It helps a lot of us when we don't know how they want us to enter our phone number, in a form. So I think prioritizing the most vulnerable, prioritizing the people who have the most difficulty is the way to go. I think it's important to educate yourself about the web accessibility standards. That's always the sort of first way to go. Whether you're a content creator, a designer, or a developer, there is some part of the web content accessibility guidelines that apply to you. And there are sites that will filter the rules by role. So if you're a content creator and you only want to see the rules that are relevant to your role, you can do that. But I think taking a little bit of time to learn about those, and then is a great first step. And then actually, I think that anytime you can talk to users do any sort of user testing or talk to users, or go to meetups, learn about accessibility, will go a long way. The rules can be very dry, and there can seem and it can seem like, well, why is it important that 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 sites have a certain color contrast? Like, why does that matter? And then if you sometimes having a name or a face to put with an accessibility need can help make it feel real. You shouldn't need to like have to meet somebody and talk to somebody who uses a screen reader or who uses high contrast settings when they're ordering groceries online, like for it to seem important, because you should just want to do this because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes I'm reminded of people who say, well, I care about women's issues now that I have daughters. And it's like, you shouldn't need to have that personal connection, but sometimes it can help. That helps. And so educate yourself about the standards, then go to meetups or talk to people, do user testing. And then sometimes it's about using those accessibility tools yourself. Like, as you said, like when you've used a screen reader or voiceover to and you saw like how long those ad URLs were, like it helps to sometimes have that firsthand experience. Sometimes accessibility issues fall through the cracks. They just do. So as a developer or a designer or a content creator, if you notice something, if you see something, say something. And wherever you are in the project, of course, we want to identify accessibility needs early on in the project, because as you get further down in the project, remediation can become more expensive. So we want to take care of all of this stuff early on, because it is cheaper and more efficient. But let's say 75% of the way through the project, you as a developer notice that some aspect of the site isn't navigable by keyboard. Make a ticket for it. Tell the client. Just say, we want to note this is an issue, so that it doesn't, we want to note this is an issue, and we're going to take care, we have it in the backlog, we're going to take care of it. Or if there's, for some reason, your videos you don't have captions ready for a video, you want to post the video right away, it needs to happen. Maybe you can tell your users, we don't have captions, we're sorry, we know this is important, we know that we value all of our users, we're going to get them, they will be up in a week, or they'll be up tomorrow. But I think at least acknowledging the gaps helps sort of validate that these things are important, that we do see that these things are important. But as a developer, I know that that's something that I've done. I notice an accessibility issue, I make a ticket for it. I think the ways that it can be effective is reviewing designs for accessibility as soon as possible, addressing issues around color contrast, tab sizes, that sort of thing can be tremendously helpful. If you can adjust a shade of gray so that it meets accessibility standards, if you can address that issue in design, and that takes care of a lot of things, that's a lot easier than having to negotiate that later on in the process. And similarly with making, if buttons need to be a little bit larger, if tab sizes need to be a little bit larger, it's a lot easier to address those in the design stage. And to have conversations about accessibility in discovery is tremendously helpful, so that everybody understands, where the where the gaps, where gaps can be, what the sort of pitfalls can be, sort of identifying those before something's actually built can be easy. There are some things that, like keyboard navigation, that you can't address with design. But again, like building for those and being sort of aware of them as people are building, and making it part of the AC for a ticket, so that a ticket doesn't pass until until the work is accessible. It helps. Going ticket by ticket again, rather than, oh, hey, we're 75% of the way through, I noticed that this is a defect across the site. Like that's a lot heavier lift than this ticket for navigation isn't going to pass until the menu is completely keyboard accessible. So a lot of times people, if they are in a position where they can't use an app that maybe they have to use for work, they can't use it without getting additional accommodations, having to disclose their invisible disability to their employer can be a risk. So if when you're building, designing or creating content for something, if you can make it so that somebody can just be themselves, not need any additional accommodations, that everything just sort of works for them, you're helping that person out a lot. And it shouldn't just, because it really shouldn't be, and this is sort of a big thing for me, is that it shouldn't be left to the people with the disabilities to do all of the advocacy for themselves. People without disabilities should be advocates for people with disabilities. Think about the Domino's pizza lawsuit, because our app wasn't accessible to visually impaired folks. How many meetings were there? How many testing sessions were there where somebody or many people could have spoken up or could have said, this is not okay, this has to be accessible, and how many people didn't? And it was left to the person with the disability to take on the burden of making the complaint when all they wanted was a pizza. People should just be able to have the pizza. And they should just be able to, access the news site. They should just be able to fill out the form, because somebody without a disability advocated for them in discovery, in design, when creating content and when building their site. So if people are interested in sort of some next steps to take or how to learn more about this, I recommend really diving into those, to the web content accessibility guidelines, learn more about which specific guidelines are important for your role, but I think having more of a general understanding of those guidelines can go a long way. If you're particularly interested in learning about invisible disabilities, you can visit the Invisible Disabilities Association at invisibledisabilities.org.